Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today, it's week 22 of the Overwatch League picks time. Second week of the Countdown Cup tournament. I want to say qualifiers, but it's not really a tournament or qualifiers. Countdown Cup heading towards the play-ins, so week 22 of the season. Let's jump in. Let's talk about the matches we got. Fewer than last week, thankfully, so not too bad this week. So let's kick off with Friday, September 30th. We have the first match of the weekend is the Seoul Dynasty taking on the Chengdu Hunters. Seoul Dynasty looked very, very good this past weekend. Win over the Shanghai Dragons. Pretty close series against the LA Valiant, but still a 3-0 for the Dynasty. So they still look pretty good. I think that you have to consider a game like that against the Valiant where it's close going the way of the Dynasty. Says a lot about where the Dynasty are as a team. It was a decent weekend for the Hunters, getting wins over the Spark and the Charge, but I'm not quite convinced about the Spark as a team. And it was a bit of a closer... They did lose them after the Spark, and the Spark looked very good. And with the Charge, it was a 3-2 game that went the distance. So I think you have to look at the Dynasty right now as the favorite in this match. They look to be possibly the best team in the APAC region right now. I think actually they definitely are. These are definitely two of the top teams in the region, though, so I think it'll be a pretty good game. Could be decently close, but I am going to go in favor of the Seoul Dynasty to take this one 3-1. I'll give the Hunters a map because they've played pretty well so far, and last weekend they did look pretty good, but I think the Dynasty right now just looks too good. I think this meta works for them very, very well. I've been very impressed with how Iris has worked into this roster, and I think the Dynasty will take this one. Second APAC match on Friday is the Philadelphia Fusion taking on the Shanghai Dragons. It is my first big pick game of the weekend. These two teams have had a lot of very close matches so far this season, or at least they've had very kind of split results, though recently they have definitely been more in favor of the Shanghai Dragons. Neither team looked particularly strong last weekend, though the Fusion did end up with a win last week while the Dragons went 0-2. Fusion looked very good with Fury on the Zarya. I think Fury is such an incredible player. I think if they can keep running him on Zarya, it'll be tough for the Dragons to really find that effectiveness against what the Fusion have run. On the other side with the Dragons, I thought they had some very weird coaching decisions. I don't love the Bebe Izayaki backline when they run it. They didn't find success with it in the Midseason Madness. They switched over to Lee Jae-gon Izayaki, and immediately they started winning again. So it's a tough position to be put in. Fleta has been up and down this season. Who Are You last tournament? Very, very good performance out of him. You have to wonder, if you can get away running Genji in this meta, should you? And if you have to run a lot of Tracer or Genji, Who Are You can run both and has looked better on the Genji, so maybe you go with Who Are You over Fleta. Those are the types of questions you got to ask. It really depends on the way Shanghai wants to play. There's a lot of things they could change. Do you go Void full-time and run Zarya? Do you put in Who Are You instead of Fleta? Do you run Lee Jae-gon instead of Bebe? You could argue that last week they made all three of the wrong moves, and that's why they struggled. They could make those roster moves, and maybe they find success. It's really tough with this Dragons roster. I just think they start very slowly in tournaments and whatnot, which is not great when you're going into playoffs. You definitely need to kind of figure out what you are, what works for you. This is the type of thing where you can't have a weekend like they had last weekend in the playoffs. You'd be eliminated. If you struggle in your first two games, you're just out. So they have to kind of figure out where they are, right the ship, and I think that this is a team that probably is just focusing more of their attention on kind of looking ahead. But even still, you definitely got to get some wins here in an ever-changing meta and going into the most important part of the season, which is the postseason. I do think Dragons should win this one, though. I think they've looked better as a whole. I think that they should right the ship this weekend. Maybe I'm wrong and they don't. But I think regardless of that, I still think it'll be a close one. So I'm going to say it is a 3-2 victory for the Shanghai Dragons. I like what they've done, but I think that the overall kind of tournament cycle, or whatever you want to call this Countdown Cup, for the Dragons and the Fusion have not looked great. And so I want to see them kind of both bounce back. So I think it'll be kind of sloppy, close, but I think the Dragons ultimately will take it when all is said and done. Moving on to the Western region, LA Gladiators taking on the London Spitfire. Good game here. for the Gladiators to try and make up some of that lost point differential that they lost during the Summer Showdown. Obviously, they struggled in the Summer Showdown. Went from 2nd overall to 3rd overall. Not terrible, but you definitely want to try to jump ahead of the Shock if you can, or the Fuel if you can. Getting a win against the Spitfire, very good for that. Spitfire had a good weekend last weekend with wins over Vancouver and Paris, though I don't think they looked as good as they've looked in the past. But if you're going to have your worst games of the tournament, it's better to have them against those two teams where you can still win even if you don't look great. I think the Gladiators are the better team. I think the Gladiators should be fine in this meta. I'm curious to see if the meta moves more towards Zarya and D.Va, or if it moves more towards Winston. The Gladiators played a lot of Doomfist in the last match. I don't really like Doomfist in this meta. In a Sombra heavy meta, I just think Doomfist just does not have the effectiveness you need. I would much rather see Zarya or D.Va. Mostly Zarya, I think, is really the better looking hero, especially with the way Hanbin's been playing it. Or Winston. If you're going to play Reiner, I think you play the Winston, but even then, I still think Zarya is probably the better pick, so I'm curious to see if we see Space come in to play Zarya. I don't know for sure. London are interesting. I think that they made weird decisions last week with their lineup. I didn't love the lineup that they were running at times with DPS, but they played two weaker teams. I don't think it really mattered as much. But to me, when you have to run Sombra and like a Widow, and they were subbing in Sparker to play the Sombra and Backbone to play the Widow, it was just odd to me when I think you can get away with Shax and Sparker, which is a better duo. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe that is the better duo, but to me it just feels like there's no real reason to run the Backbone Widow. It was weird, it was odd, so I don't love what the Spitfire did. I don't think they looked great. So I think the Gladiators should be heavily favored in this one. I think they're going to take this one. I'm going to say 3-1 win for the Gladiators. They've looked way better. They've looked more consistent. So to me, a 3-1 win for the Gladiators seems pretty likely, if not a 3-0. But I'll give the Spitfire a map. Vancouver Titans take on the Dallas Fuel. That's the second NA match on Friday. I don't think this one will be close at all. I think the Dallas Fuel will take this one. They're better by a lot. Titans are eliminated from the playoffs. They don't have much to play for anymore. Obviously, they're still going to try to keep their positions in the league. And you have players like Aspire and Masa, who definitely have looked very good this season, where you would say that they definitely deserve a future. And same with King, where you definitely look at these players and say, yeah, they're legit. But I just think the Fuel are so much better than the Titans are right now. I think the Fuel should take this one 3-0. Final match on Friday is the San Francisco Shock versus the Toronto Defiant. Really rough match for the Shock, considering what they did last weekend. They did not look good last weekend with losses to the Washington Justice and the Houston Outlaws. This week is not much better. Feels very similar to what we saw from the Gladiators in the Summer Showdown, where they started off pretty weak against two good teams. And then the following week or weeks, their schedule didn't really let up really at all. This one, I think, is slightly better for the Shock than their later match, and we'll talk about that one when we get there. But in this case, the Shock are playing against the Toronto Defiant, who I thought the Defiant played pretty well against the Shock when they played in the Summer Showdown in the playoffs. Obviously, the Shock ended up winning that one, and as the series progressed, it was pretty clear that the Shock were doing better, but I thought the Defiant looked pretty good in that match. The Defiant did not have a good weekend last weekend. They lost to the Reign, and they lost to the Excelsior, but I still think overall they're a pretty solid team. I think that they are. I think that last weekend was a bit of an odd one for them. I think they'll kind of figure things out. For me, the Shock, I thought, just did not have great coaching decisions last week. I didn't love the ball from Mikey. I think that, much like Doomfist and a Sombra heavy meta, why are you running Wrecking Ball? Doesn't really make a lot of sense. I don't know why they were running Violet on Ana and Finn on Zen. That's weird. You would expect them to be switched, because we know historically Violet has struggled on the Ana, but has been one of the best Zens we've ever seen. That was a weird decision. I didn't think their coaching decisions were great last weekend. I think that kind of shows an issue this team has had for most of the season, which is where I think that, relatively speaking, their strategy literally is just proper go win, and everything else is just kind of proper trying to carry this dysfunctional, kind of weird team around him at times. and it's catching up to them now, where teams are starting to realize that you can abuse them in different ways. So I think it's tough for the Shock right now. I don't think they look great right now. I want to see them kind of solidify what they are, and stop making these weird substitutions and running comps that I don't like. The Defiant, though, also need to bounce back. These are both teams that had a bad weekend last weekend, which makes me feel like both of the ball is in literally both of these teams' courts to bounce back and have a better weekend this weekend than they did last weekend. And if you have to ask me which of the teams I trust more to do that, I'm going to pick the Shock. They've been more consistent this season. They've been the better team overall. And I just think when push comes to shove, you have two teams that are struggling. Almost always I'm going to pick the team that has had more success so far this season. And so I think the Shock will take this one. I think it'll be close, though. I don't think either of these teams played particularly well last week. I think both of them have the potential to bounce back. But I'm going to take the Shock to take this series by a score of 3-2. Moving on to Saturday, APAC region, Hangzhou Spark take on the Shanghai Dragons. I think the Spark are the worst looking team in the region right now. Arguably one of the worst looking teams in the league. I don't think they looked good last week. Shanghai Dragons, on the other hand, struggled last week, but I think that they have a little bit more. I think it is easier for them to fix their mistakes than it is the Spark. The Spark have been a mistake-prone organization for years at this point in time, and they seem to never really feel like they actually want to improve their position. Whereas with the Shanghai Dragons, I think there is a very simple change that you can make in any of your lines, in either your support line or your damage lineup or with your tank, that will have an improvement on the roster. I don't necessarily know which one will be the most effective, which is why I think that they might struggle a bit against the Fusion. But that bad the Spark look, I think the Dragons should take this one pretty easily. I just think the Spark are struggling right now. Their support line's a mess. I don't love what they're doing with their tank line. And Shy and Alfie can only pop off and carry so hard before the entire team lets them down. So to me, Dragons are going to take this one. I think it'll be a pretty one-sided affair. I'm going to say a 3-0 victory for the Shanghai Dragons over the Hangzhou Spark. Chengdu Hunters are going to take on the LA Valiant. Every time these two teams play, it's pretty interesting. Valiant have had success against the Fusion this season. The Valiant had success against the Hunters this season. I believe they're 2-1 against the Hunters right now. Valiant beat these kind of middle-of-the-pack teams in the region pretty consistently. It's a matter of whether or not the teams can kind of have a good result. I thought the Valiant played pretty well last week. Other people seem to agree with me on that one. They had a 3-0 loss to the Dynasty, but it was much closer than the scoreline would tell you, and they beat the Fusion in 5 maps. So they look pretty good right now. They are one of the better teams in this region right now, as are the Chengdu Hunters. So I think this game has potential to be a pretty solid one. Valiant fighting for that final play-in spot. A good weekend from them. They could get in over the Guangzhou charge. It's, the Hunters haven't even locked up a spot. If the Hunters start to struggle, they have to play the Dynasty, right? The Valiant definitely are a team that could win 2 games this weekend and put themselves in a pretty good spot, potentially, to make the play-in tournament. It'll be interesting to watch. I've liked what we've seen from the Hunters. They do weird things. I don't love them in this meta because it's a pretty off-tank heavy meta, at least in the West is an off-tank heavy meta. In the East, you can run pretty much whatever you want. But I don't love Daisy in the tank lineup. I actually think, in general, I think the Valiant are better in the tank lineup. I like Marvel more than I like Gaga, and I like Sashin, at least on Zarya, better than Daisy. So in that way, I think the Valiant looked pretty good. I thought Easyon had a great weekend last weekend. It'll be close. I think it'll be a pretty close one, but I think the Hunters are just better right now. I think Leave able to play a lot more of his comfort roles. I thought Jinmu had a pretty good weekend last weekend, so I'm going to take the Hunters in this one. But it's going to be a close one. I think 3-2 victory for the Hunters over the LA Valiant. Final APAC match on Saturday, Guangzhou Charge against the Seoul Dynasty. I think the Charge are a good team right now. I think that they look pretty good. They beat the Dragons last week. Dragons struggling a bit, but they did win. Close series for that one. I think the Dynasty are too good. This could be a 3-0. This could be a 3-1 for the Dynasty. I really think the Dynasty are that good. They 3-0'd the Dragons. Who's to say they can't 3-0 the Charge? I'm hesitant to say a 3-0 because I do think there is some life in this Charge team. So I'll say it's a 3-1 for the Dynasty. But the Dynasty, to me, are the best team in this region right now, and I think there's no reason to think they will fall to a Charge team that, though they're improving, are not quite Dynasty level yet. Moving into the Western region, London Spitfire taking on the Dallas Fuel. Fuel look like one of the best teams in the region, if not the best team in the region, if not the best team in the world right now. Spitfire, tough weekend for them, having to play the Gladiators and the Fuel in back-to-back days. I think it's going to be a rough outing for the Spitfire. I don't love what we've seen from them. I think the Fuel are built for this meta. Doha on Sombra, Hanbin on Zarya, Edison clearly on Genji, which I didn't expect. I think the support line looks good in this one. I like what this team has right now. I think the Fuel are going to take this one pretty easily. I'm going to say 3-1 win for the Dallas Fuel over the London Spitfire. New York Excelsior taking on the Washington Justice. This one could be close. New York looked okay last week against Toronto. They did have to reverse sweep them. They did not look good against Atlanta. Washington beat the Shock last week. Good win for them. But they also lost to someone, and I'm forgetting who it was that they lost to last week. The Dallas Fuel. So they beat two good teams, or they played two good teams, and they split. I think you have to favor the Justice in this one. I think they just look better than the Excelsior do. I don't have a ton of faith in the Excelsior, so I'm going to say a 3-2 for the Justice. This could honestly be more one-sided, but if Flora and Yaki play like they did last week, especially Flora, I could see someone going the distance. Final NA match on Saturday is the Atlanta Reign taking on the San Francisco Shock. It's my second big pick game of the weekend. I think the Reign are a tougher out for the Shock than the Defiant are. The Reign and Defiant had a close series when they played in week 1. Atlanta almost getting reverse swept, but kind of solidifying. Atlanta said they kind of threw a bit, which could maybe be true. I think you have to assume that the Defiant kind of started to get into the groove of things, but they also lost to the Excelsior, so really who knows. I think the Reign look really good right now. I think with Speedily and Vigilante coming in, the lineup has just looked a lot better. They looked a lot stronger. I think it's a tough one for the Shock to have to match up against the Reign this weekend. I think it's just way too good of a team to feel confident going into, especially when this is the first match of the weekend for the Reign. They don't play again until Sunday. So they'll have the tape of the Shock Defiant match. They'll kind of get to see how that one goes. I don't necessarily think that always has an impact. It seems to not have as much of an impact as I emphasize it in a lot of my videos, but I think in a matchup like this where you're the favored team in the sake of the Reign, which I think they are, by a lot of people's opinion, the favorites based on the performances last week, I think it's really tough for the Shock here. I think that the compositions that we've seen out of the Reign have been very good, and they've been doing a lot without Kai, who is arguably their best player, and they've been finding tons of success even without Kai in. So I think the Shock have a tough matchup here with the Reign, but the Reign are not the most consistent team. I think that they've had some, I think their game against Toronto is a bit of a questionable one, though their dominance against New York, despite the fact that Flora popped off in this match, shows that the Reign can definitely kind of clamp down. It could have been a 3-0 against Toronto that went the way they didn't want it to. I think it's tough to call against the Shock, even when they don't look great, but I think in this matchup, the Reign will be the superior team. I think they'll take the win, and I'm going to say the Reign take it by a score of 3-2. Moving on to Sunday, APAC, Guangzhou Charge versus Philadelphia Fusion. Charge to me right now look like the better team, which is funny when you consider where the season started, but that's how things work. I think Yveltal and Farway have been very good as the support duo for this team. Jimmy and Choicewan have looked very good. I'm still not 100% sold on Piggy as their tank. I think it's interesting. I think putting him in and kind of plugging him in when you have already built a very different team is a questionable decision, though I think it worked for them last week, and I think that it'll continue to work for them over time, because I think that the more time they get with Piggy, the better he's going to get naturally, so I don't think it should be that big of a deal going forward. They've looked more consistent. I think they've looked more consistent across the roles than the Fusion have. Fusion have higher highs than the Charge have, but right now, I feel better at the Charge than I do the Fusion. Definitely could go either way, but I'm going to say this one goes the way of the Charge by a score of 3-1. Final APAC match of the week is the Hangzhou Spark against the LA Valiant. Valiant, I think, are favorites in this one. I think they do look better right now. I think the Spark just do not look good. I don't think the Teru Neko experiment is working. I think that was a mistake in the fact that they put both of them in. Something's going on with the Spark. Again, I don't know what it is. They always have something going on. The Valiant also have stuff going on, to be fair. Hopefully not the same stuff the Spark have going on, because if two teams have that going on, I'd be concerned. But the Valiant looked pretty good last week. I think it's funny that they literally signed a Sombra specialist and then didn't play him in the first meta where Sombra is looking to be pretty good. Pretty funny to me, but it is what it is. Valiant, good team though. I like what they've done so far in this tournament. Like I said, close result against the Dynasty, despite what the scoreline would tell you. And a good win last week against the Fusion. I think the Valiant look pretty good. I think the Valiant are a solid team. Strong team. Definitely one of the ones I think could make some ripples and try to, sneak their way into the play-in tournament. I think they'll take the win over the Spark. I just don't feel great about the Spark, so to me, Valiant take this one 3-1. I think Sunday in the West is going to be big 3 Overwatch day. LA Gladiators take on the New York Excelsior. You know the New York Excelsior are not going to win this game. They don't look good. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that I'm going to pick the Gladiators take this one 3-0. They just look significantly better than New York does right now. Atlanta Reign versus Washington Justice. This one could be closer. I think the Justice, like I said, winning last week against the Shock was a good win for them. First time they've ever beaten the San Francisco Shock, but I think the Atlanta Reign are just a better team right now. I think they're stronger. I think they have way more flexibility. I think they have a more dominant presence. I think this is a meta that the Justice, in theory, should be good at. A lot of Zarya play. You can play a lot of Kalios as a result, though they played a lot of Orisa, so I don't know for sure. Assassin on Sombra, here he's pretty good at. Decay on Tracer, here he's pretty good at. So in theory, the Justice should be pretty good in this meta, but I think that the lack of flexibility could hurt them. The Reign, I still think, are better in a lot of those same roles. And I think the Reign right now look very, very good. So I'm going to say it's a 3-0 for this one. Could be a 3-1, could be a 3-2. I do think the Justice, in theory, should be good in this meta, but they've been way too up and down, I think, for me to feel confident in them getting a great performance out of the Reign. I don't think they'll play poorly, but I don't think I view it kind of similarly to the Valiant Dynasty game from last weekend, where I think the Justice will push the Reign at times, but the Reign will have enough of a cushion that they're just going to win in 3, even though I think the Justice will look pretty good. Final match of the weekend, Vancouver Titans, Toronto Defiant, Battle for Canada. I don't think the Titans look good. I have been saying this for a while. Last tournament was definitely a fluke because their tournament schedule was very, very easy, and the meta was very specifically one that they could work into with Mirror. I don't think they look good in this meta. I think that their schedule is way tougher this meta, and I think that their team just doesn't look great. They're eliminated from the playoffs. I think that they are going to be motivated in some ways, but I think their motivation will not be nearly the same motivation for the Toronto players who want to get that top 6 playoff spot guaranteed. To me, Toronto wins this one. The match means way more to them, and I think Toronto takes this one 3-0. I think Vancouver just do not look good, simply put. I think they're a weak-looking team right now. I don't have any reason to think that they will have a good performance this weekend. To me, Toronto 3-0 this final match. So here's my overall picks for you guys to see. You can look at them here in case you're curious, but that is going to be it for this week. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below on my picks or your picks, whatever it is, anything about that. And if you want more like this in the future, more videos like this, of course, consider liking and subscribing, because that does help a lot. But that is going to be all from me for today. Hope you all enjoyed. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.